She was once the most dazzling woman in Europe, a brilliant mind behind a sculpted face that inspired poets, painters, and princes. Men of power and pedigree fell hopelessly in love with her. Princes proposed. Dukes lost their composure. Even Marcel Proust was captivated. Her beauty became legend, but it was her wit, her voice, her restless presence that haunted memories long after that famous face had faded. Yet Gladys Deacon's life was never one of triumph or of lasting legacy. It was a story written in tragedy, loneliness, and slow, creeping madness. By the time she died, she was locked away in near total isolation inside a psychiatric hospital, hoarding cats, barking orders at nurses, and refusing to speak the name of the man who had ruined her life. Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. How does someone once so brilliant and so luminous fall so far? From the glittering salons of Paris, Newport, and London, and the marble halls of Blenheim Palace, how does it end in a locked ward at St. Andrews? Join us as we uncover the tragic, forgotten life of Gladys Deacon, Duchess of Marlborough. This is not just the story of a duchess. It's the story of a woman who defied every label society forced upon her and paid the price with everything she had left. And if you enjoy this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history's most extraordinary figures. Let's get started. Gladys Deacon's early life was gilded, yet shadowed by turmoil. Born February 7th, 1881, at the Hotel Brighton in Paris to Florence and Edward Parker Deacon, she was the most striking of 4 sisters. Her early memories, later recounted to her loyal nurse Irma Deodat, flickered between innocence and dread. A goat cart in Hyde Park, her mother's brocade gowns, the household dog, but also her father's seething jealousy and the suffocating tension that worsened her lifelong dyspepsia. After marrying, Florence and Edward settled into Parisian society on June 29th and charmed literary circles, befriending Henry James. Florence adored extravagance, fortuney gowns, lavish boutiques, endless luxuries like Vermeil dressing sets she didn't need. By 1885, she'd shed her American roots for French high society. Behind the velvet curtain, though, the marriage turned cruel almost immediately. A month in, Edward struck Florence over her hairstyle, bullied her in public, and forced hotel staff to demand written consent for the simplest tasks. Their only son died in May 1887, and Edward met Florence's grief with fresh violence, beating her so savagely the bruises lingered for days. His drinking fed his rage, and the beating spilled over to all 4 daughters at their Chacombe estate. When Florence's father died in 1888, leaving her a third of his estate, $235,408, nearly $8 million in today's money, Edward refused to contribute another penny toward family expenses, forcing Florence to keep the family afloat alone. Desperate under Edward's iron fist, Florence drifted toward other men. Edward suspected many affairs, but Émile François Abbé triggered the final scandal. Introduced in 1888 by the Baron Edmond de Rothschild, Abbé was a pockmarked ex-diplomat who'd abandoned service for a leisurely life of wealthy women and exclusive resorts. Despite Edward mocking him as the Yellow Dwarf, Abbé's charm got him invited everywhere, until an anonymous tip accused Florence of an affair. She broke off contact for 2 years, only for Abbé to return in secret. When Edward found a love note in Florence's desk and Abbé lurking behind a curtain, he exploded, accusing Florence of adultery and questioning baby Dorothy's paternity. Florence insisted Abbé was just checking on her health, though she later admitted posing nude for him. Edward grudgingly allowed Abbé's return, but Abbé soon leased a hidden apartment under a false name where Florence secretly visited. A vengeful Comtesse du Barry, jealous of Abbé's attention, fed Edward damning details. Given an ultimatum to abandon Abbé or face divorce, Florence refused. Even when Edward caught her traveling with Abbé, she brushed it off as coincidence. but Edward's suspicions reignited when Abbé reappeared at their home. He hired detectives to catch them, but one, loyal to Florence, tipped her off. Though proof remained thin, Edward found out Florence had dined alone with yet another man after seeing Abbé. Despite it all, he let Florence and the children winter in the south of France. In February 1892, Florence took the girls to Caen. Abbé shadowed her discreetly. Edward turned up soon after, discovered Abbé's name in the hotel register, and forced Florence to move to the Hôtel Splendide. Unaware, Abbé booked the suite next door. On February 17th, Edward, arriving back at midnight, heard Abbé's voice behind Florence's door. He burst in with a revolver. Abbé was cowering behind a sofa when Edward fired 3 shots into his chest and leg. Abbé staggered out, bleeding. Florence begged Edward to stop, but he turned to her and said, chillingly, that he would not shoot her for the sake of their children. He calmly summoned the police and surrendered. Abbé, carried to his suite, lingered through the night, allegedly dictating a will leaving Florence 500,000 francs, before dying at dawn. Edward surrendered at the American vice consulate, claiming he'd only meant to mark Abbé. He was jailed in Grasse. Florence fled to Paris, publicly denying any wrongdoing, though her stepmother later confirmed Florence had loved Abbé but felt trapped by convention. The scandal swept Europe and America. French papers spat contempt at Edward, but American expats mostly pitied him. On February 27th, Florence and Edward faced each other in court for the first time. Edward, so rattled, collapsed and was put to bed. He rewrote his will to disinherit Florence, but safeguarded his daughter's future. The trial in Nice began May 20th, 1892. Florence stayed away claiming illness, branding Edward a drunk and madman, yet still hoped he'd go free for the children's sake. The jury, swayed by Edward's remorse and Maître Demange's skillful defense, convicted him only of wounding with no murderous intent. He got 1 year in prison. Days later, Edward was granted custody of all 4 daughters. Audrey and Edith were sent to live with his brother Harleston. Gladys and baby Dorothy were moved to Genoa with Florence's stepmother, Moraine Baldwin, then enrolled at the Convent de l'Assomption in Paris, where Gladys's formal schooling began. From prison, Edward wrote tender letters to Gladys, urging her to be clever, strong, everything her mother, in his eyes, was not. Meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador petitioned for Edward's early release. Florence's failed bid to reclaim the girls only pushed Edward to file for adultery. On September 22, 1892, President Carnot pardoned him. By November, he secured full custody and set off to move the girls to America. But when he arrived at the convent for Gladys, she was gone, spirited away by Florence. Florence used Gladys as a shield to protect her battered reputation, warning Edward that if he pressed adultery charges, he'd never see his daughter again. A court ordered Gladys returned and split visitation, but the convent refused to take her back. Too scandalous now. The battle turned vicious. Edward pressed criminal charges, Florence countered with accusations of cruelty, and filed for divorce. He sued her in New York, naming multiple lovers. In 1893, Edward finally won sole custody of the 3 eldest girls and a divorce. Florence stayed behind in Paris with Dorothy, while Gladys, at 12, sailed to America with her father, sorrowful to leave, but still clutching hope she might see her mother again someday. After a quick stopover in London, Edward and Gladys arrived in New York on March 23, 1893, taking rooms at the Buckingham Hotel at 50th and 5th. Gladys reunited with her sisters Audrey and Edith, and the family settled in Newport, Rhode Island. There, she came alive, riding in a dog cart, picnicking by steam launch, fishing and exploring the White Mountains. She excelled at her studies and breezed through exams, but by 12, she'd outgrown the local school and was sent to Howard Seminary for Women in West Bridgewater, Massachusetts. The custody battle never truly ended. Florence, Still in Paris with her great-aunt and little Dorothy, stayed determined to get her daughters back. She crossed the Atlantic more than once, but Edward swore nothing on earth would separate him from his girls. Meanwhile, Gladys thrived, playing the mandolin, her voice a contralto, dreaming of the opera and Sarah Bernhardt. But painting captured her whole heart. In June 1895, Florence made another push, renting a house on Dram Island in Sorrento Harbor, Maine. Now a blossoming belle, Gladys begged her mother to keep fighting for her. Edward refused. He'd only give up Gladys if Florence let him keep Audrey and Edith. That October, Gladys was captivated by the news of Consuelo Vanderbilt's engagement to the Duke of Marlborough, an American heiress snagging a British title. She teased her mother that if she'd been older, she might have won the Duke herself, claiming she was already mature in the ways of women's witchcraft. For girls like Gladys, the Vanderbilt marriage was the ultimate dream. Money turned into aristocratic rank. On her 15th birthday in 1896, a friend's letter from Cairo describing Consuelo's gowns only fueled Gladys's resolve to outshine her imagined rival. In spring 1896, Edward allowed Gladys and Audrey to visit their grandmother for Easter, but it became a cruel trap. Edward forced Gladys to choose: stay with Florence only if she gave up his name, renounced him, and abandoned her sisters. His lawyer stepped in before it worsened. By March, Edward handed custody of Gladys and Audrey to Florence, calling it an act of trust. Gladys left Howard Seminary, clutching her beloved Virgil, and returned to Paris. Audrey and Edith stayed behind for school. Audrey wouldn't rejoin them until 1898. Gladys still sent Edward gifts but never saw him again. Edward's mind unraveled quickly. By July 1897, he was Newport's local scandal, removing his shoes and false teeth in public, riding alone in a Civil War uniform, cooling his head with ice at the Reading Room. Doctors called it confusional mania. On August 22, 1897, he suffered a severe breakdown in Boston and was committed to McLean Hospital in Belmont, haggard, worn, and emaciated, a shadow of his former self. In December, Florence visited him there with her brother Charlie and Edward's brother Harleston. The meeting was cautiously hopeful. Florence's letters about the girls comforted Edward. By March 1898, he eagerly anticipated seeing her again. But that April, he escaped, sawed through window bars at dawn, broke his ankle leaping down, then limped 10 miles before politely offering to sew for a startled woman. When found, he returned cheerfully. By 1901, Florence wrote that Edward believed he was a nephew of Moses. He died on July 5th of a brain seizure and pneumonia. His $120,000 estate was split among the 4 girls. Each inherited $50,000. Between 1896 and early 1897, Gladys returned to Europe and enrolled at a school in Bonn, Germany. She loathed the tame language lessons and transferred to the Fröhlich School for deeper immersion, promising Florence she'd stay until Christmas. She begged to leave but stuck it out until December 1898. She added Italian, mastered the piano until she heard someone better, declaring one musical sister enough, and threw herself into photography, tapestry, and trips to Darmstadt. At 17, her days brimmed with parties, coaching excursions, and balls. Audrey joined her in Dresden in 1898. Despite the family scandal, they were welcomed warmly. At an Italian ball, Gladys bowed to the king and queen and reassured Audrey that her triumph meant Audrey had nothing to fear. Gladys's hunger for knowledge only sharpened. She taught herself Homer and Greek and relished reading him in the original. She learned Latin on her own, enchanted by Pliny's prose, and joked her studying mania might turn her into a professor. By 1899, she was back in Paris tailoring her own education, private math lessons at Sacré-Cœur, where she debated problems one-on-one instead of parroting answers. Though she never went to university, she fiercely championed women's education. By 1902, she was described as beautiful, spirited, and astute, holding her own with peers and elders alike. She left a vivid impression, luminous blue eyes, a refined brow, a good Hellenic profile that wasn't perfect, but unforgettable. People said her eyes could see right through you. Giovanni Boldini sketched her in 1899 and again in 1901 for his glittering gallery of aristocrats. She declined Jacques-Émile Blanche's offer to paint her at Offranville, but sat for Paul César Helleu that December, skipping lunch so he could finish his sketches. He paid her in drawings worth 1,000 francs. In 1899, Gladys and Florence visited Charlie Baldwin in Beaulieu, California. The journey from Le Havre to Santa Clara nearly killed them. After crossing to New York by ship, their train derailed in Georgia, leaving them stranded 30 feet above a swamp overnight. No one died, but firemen were badly hurt. Moved by their plight, Gladys raised 300 francs herself from indifferent passengers for the injured men. By December, they finally reached Santa Clara, but Florence's return scandalized San Francisco society. Charlie's attempt to reintroduce his infamous sister into polite circles backfired spectacularly. Luncheons and theater were tolerated, but when he tried to bring her to the exclusive Burlingame Country Club, the uproar forced his resignation on February 11, 1900. 9 days later, Florence, Gladys, and their small circle left America for good. Gladys never returned. Back in Paris, Gladys threw herself into Belle Époque society with fierce energy. By 1901, 20-year-old Gladys was burning herself out with relentless study and brushing off every suitor, something that worried Florence deeply. Summers were spent with the Baldwin family in Sils Maria near St. Moritz. There, back in 1897, 16-year-old Gladys had met Bernard Berenson through friends. Berenson, then 32 and newlywed, fell hard for her and later confessed to his wife Mary that he had once wanted to marry her. Berenson, born in Russia and raised in Boston, was becoming a star in the art world, backed by Isabella Stewart Gardner. He and Mary built their influential circle at Villa Aetati near Florence, which Florence and Gladys often visited. Mary Berenson's diaries captured Gladys perfectly, a walking contradiction, dazzling, brilliant, dramatic yet emotionally distant. Her doctor thought she might never fully mature physically. Gladys herself described her body as hermaphrodite, though Mary blamed an upbringing obsessed with beauty, but starved of real affection. By 1902, 21-year-old Gladys inspired the heroine of Cecilia, a story of modern Rome by F. Marion Crawford, who insisted only her looks were borrowed, though the resemblance was uncanny. Like Gladys, Cecilia polarized people, a Greek statue come alive to some, a restless soul who haunted Sorbonne lectures and devoured Nietzsche. By 1901, Gladys was tiring of both Paris and London's glitter. Her life shifted for good when she truly crossed paths with the Duke and Duchess of Marlborough. She'd been fascinated by them for years and first met them sometime between 1898 and 1900, and by 1901, she and Consuelo Vanderbilt were well acquainted. In The Glitter and the Gold, Consuelo recalled Florence's dogged efforts to launch her daughters into English society and meeting Gladys, struck at once by her rare blend of beauty, wit, and charm. The Duke, Charles Spencer Churchill, nicknamed Sonny after his courtesy title, Earl of Sunderland, had grown up cold and rigid. His parents' scandalous 1883 divorce over an affair with the Countess of Aylesford nearly toppled the monarchy by dragging in the Prince of Wales. His strict grandmother, Duchess Frances Anne, drilled duty into him but crushed any warmth. Rumors even swirled that he tortured animals as a boy. When Sonny inherited Blenheim at 21 in 1892, he also inherited financial ruin. His 1895 marriage to Consuelo Vanderbilt and her fortune rescued Blenheim, but cost him his true love, likely Muriel Wilson. Consuelo had been forced by her mother, Alva, to break off her engagement to Winthrop Rutherford. Their dazzling marriage was a hollow deal, and by 1898 it was crumbling. Consuelo reunited briefly with Rutherford in Paris, but he refused to elope. Sunny, bitter but resigned, tolerated it, yet resentment simmered. By 1900, Consuelo lived mostly with her father in Paris. Rumors swirled she shared a roof with Frederick Guest. When Sunny came back from the South African War, Consuelo confessed any closeness between them had become somewhat distasteful. His lawyer, Richard Haldane, urged him to stand firm, preserve dignity, and offer Consuelo an honorable exit for the children's sake. Into this tense marriage walked 20-year-old Gladys Deacon, ready to upend it all. Gladys arrived at Blenheim just before a grand Unionist rally on August 10, 1901. Joseph Chamberlain, Arthur Balfour, and Winston Churchill came to celebrate unity after the South African War. Her presence revived the gloomy palace. Both Sunny and Consuelo were drawn in. Consuelo especially adored their long talks on art and literature. Not long after, Sunny left for Harrogate, but wrote Gladys quoting La Rochefoucauld about how absence stokes passion. He confessed he still hoped for happiness, though he doubted it. By August 31st, Sunny was back at Blenheim to host Crown Prince Wilhelm of Prussia, whose father, Kaiser Wilhelm II, fondly remembered his own visits there. 19-year-old Crown Prince Wilhelm arrived with a glittering entourage: Counts Wolf Metternich, Mensdorf, Eulenburg, and Colonel von Pritzelwitz. Shy and awkward, the prince was smitten with Gladys. During a tennis game, he gave her his first communion ring. She gave him a bracelet in return. When the Kaiser noticed the missing ring, he demanded its return. The prince's chamberlain retrieved both the ring and bracelet. Gladys handed them back reluctantly. When the Berensons asked, Gladys brushed it off, saying the prince was very devoted, but rumors were exaggerated. Tina Whittaker gave a different version. The ring was tight, and Gladys insisted on taking it. Even as the prince protested, it had belonged to Queen Victoria. Later that month, Gladys and Consuelo toured Germany together, visiting Dresden for its art and opera. Back in Paris, the Duke visited Gladys. She sent gifts to his sons, whom Consuelo noted adored her. By 1902, Consuelo's letters to Gladys brimmed with warmth. She even dreamed of spiritual retreats together and promised Gladys a lock of her hair. But before leaving for Bologna that April, Gladys confided to Mary Berenson that Consuelo was heartbroken because Sunny was making wild love to her. Alarmed, Mary called Gladys brilliant but reckless, cruel, selfish, undisciplined, and a compulsive liar, claiming she never knew a person who told so many lies. That spring, Gladys visited Sunny's mother and his odd sister, Lady Nora, famed for training a pet frog to leap into her mouth, in Florence. Admirers swarmed. W.T. Stead noted American gossip columns forever linked her name with titled men, the Marquis de Lubersac, rumored to have also chased her mother and La Belle Otero, Prince Karl of Liechtenstein, one of Florence's old suitors, and MP Claude Lowther. That summer, Florence rented 3 Hyde Park Place to launch Gladys into society for Edward VII's coronation on June 26th. Draped in ethereal white, Gladys dazzled London's elite. Her calendar overflowed. At Seaford House, she looked very lovely and accepted, then declined, a proposal from Lady Howard de Walden's son. After her Blenheim encounter with the Crown Prince made headlines, she became so iconic that a Miss Deacon paper doll was even published. Albert Flement called her a meteor blazing through Europe. At 21, she stood at her peak. She would stay famous, but never so breathtaking again. She left London for Paris, certain she had conquered it. By August 1903, writer Knight Boyce noted that Gladys had already suffered 2 breakdowns. The first, around 1900, struck after she collapsed from exhaustion at the Louvre, and a ball where she appeared costumed as a Hoppner portrait. Before wintering in Rome, Florence remarked that her daughter seemed spirited, yet mentally fragile. A second collapse in autumn 1902 sent Gladys to Biarritz, then Ugbrook Park. Alone in Paris, aching for her mother and the Marlboroughs. She became obsessed with correcting a slight dip between her forehead and nose. Marta Babesco saw this fixation as a tragic devotion to flawed ideals of beauty. Inspired by Greco-Roman statues, Gladys studied ancient profiles at the Museo del Terme in Rome. Back in Paris, she visited a professor at the Institut de Beauté and arranged for paraffin wax injections, an experimental procedure by Austrian surgeon Robert Gersuni, but dangerous. Paraffin could cause lumps, infection, or wax cancer. Initially, it seemed to work, but Gladys's own prodding likely disturbed the healing, leading to pain, swelling, and paraffinomas in her chin. A surgeon diagnosed necrosis, dead tissue threatening disfigurement or death. By February 1903, news of her botched nose job exploded worldwide. A Biarritz telegram claimed necrosis had set in, possibly disfiguring or fatal. Cosmetic touch-ups were fashionable in France, but this scandal horrified Europe and America, sparking pity and gossip in equal measure. Yet, despite the grim prognosis, Gladys recovered better than anyone expected. With Florence away in New York, Gladys kept a quiet routine in Paris on Rue Jean Goujon with her sisters. Morning rides, Leo Stein's lunches, reading, early nights. She wrote to Berenson about the comfort of sleep and her growing indifference to society parties. When Florence returned in early 1903, she was appalled. At 22, Gladys looked frail, bald, and mentally unwell. Diagnosed with nervous disorders, she was committed to Dr. Paul Solia's sanatorium at Boulogne-Billancourt, known for treating the mentally ill. Only Florence visited. When Mary Berenson came, she was shaken by Gladys's confusion and patchy memory. But by summer 1903, Gladys was stable again, praising Dr. Salyer's methods and letters. That same summer, Florence turned her focus to launching Audrey in London society, hoping to recreate Gladys's past triumph. But Audrey failed to captivate, and Gladys herself undercut her debut. Rumors swirled that she had betrayed Consuelo, and one incident saw her barred from the Duchess of Westminster's stand. The final blow came when wealthy American Mr. Widener took interest in Audrey. With Florence away, Audrey arranged a dinner with him and Lady Cunard, only for Gladys to secretly cancel it, claiming Audrey had another engagement. When Audrey found out, she exploded, vowing to scar Gladys for life if she ever crossed her again. Afterward, Gladys fled to Blenheim while Florence and Audrey went to Maloja, Switzerland. In late 1903, Florence and her daughters arrived in Rome, partly because of Florence's affair with Prince Alfonso Doria Pamphili. Gladys attracted new admirers like Prince Raffaello Catani, but tragedy struck when Audrey fell gravely ill. She rallied briefly at Anzio, then a Florence clinic, where doctors diagnosed infectious endocarditis caused by influenza and stress. Audrey became delirious, sleepless, desperate. Digitalis and morphine failed. By mid-May, Audrey was critical. Florence, cold and distant, brushed off Gladys's pleas for comfort. Audrey's decline spiraled into a suicide attempt. 4 nurses restrained her. Gladys begged for psychiatric care, but Florence chose instead to travel with Prince Torlonia. When she finally appeared, she wept, but told Gladys Audrey's death would be a relief. A burden lifted after her failure to captivate society, unlike Gladys, who dazzled effortlessly. As the end neared, Gladys stayed at her sister's side. Audrey, lucid for a moment, recognized her, clung to her scent, and drifted off soothed. On May 21st, Audrey convulsed. After caffeine and ether were administered, she whispered "Goodbye, Mama," and slipped into shallow breaths, dying peacefully on May 22nd. Florence left immediately with Prince Doria, abandoning Gladys alone at Audrey's grave. The abrupt exit so disgusted Carlo Placci that he called it tasteless. After the funeral, Florence and Gladys moved from Florence to Rome. Florence, pristine as ever, ears painted, handkerchief in hand, seemed hollow inside. Gladys was shattered, red-eyed, disheveled, inconsolable in an old dress. Grief turned her sharp. She lashed out at her aristocratic circle, reeling from her first true loss. Her faith in any afterlife cracked. By late 1904, they settled at the Palazzo Borghese, where they stayed 9 years. Florence's affair with Prince Doria deepened. He paid their debts. But the scandal finished any last scraps of social respectability. Mabel Dodge Luhan observed that Gladys's beauty still mesmerized, but Florence's disgrace kept them outsiders. Over the next year, Gladys drew suitors, Prince Torlonia, Goffredo Caetani, the Duke of Camastra, but nothing lasted. By early 1905, her standing in Rome had crumbled. Her sharp tongue and erratic moods made her widely disliked. Her bond with Florence soured so badly that high society found them intolerable. Gladys withdrew to the Hotel Minerva, retreating from the world. Privately, she battled her own body. She'd only just begun menstruating the previous autumn, but her cycle stopped. Painful dilation treatments brought fever and nausea. A hidden operation revealed a congenital defect, a retroverted uterus blocking her cervix, finally explaining her lifelong morning sickness. Mary Berenson feared she would always be frail, though she glimpsed signs of new maturity. Roman gossip twisted everything. Some whispered insanity, others tuberculosis. Florence dismissed it all as Gladys's theatrics. By year's end, Gladys returned to Rome, somewhat steadied, living quietly. Marcel Proust became spellbound by her, shaping Miss Foster in À la recherche du temps perdu after her. From 1906 until his death in 1922, he stayed enthralled, once calling her too magnificent to ever leave Italy, like an ancient Greek coin. Gladys devoured every volume, certain his illnesses were just artistic drama. They reunited briefly at the 1919 Peace Conference, and again at a 1921 dinner, just before her fateful marriage. Though many blamed Gladys for tearing apart the Marlboroughs' marriage, her name never appeared in any legal papers. Sir George Lewis confirmed it in 1910. In truth, Consuelo had strayed first. Once close to both Duke and Duchess, Gladys had drawn Sonny's attention since 1901. Consuelo had once written her tender letters. By 1906, the friendship lay in ruins, with Consuelo's circle pinning all blame on Gladys. Desperate to escape the cold marriage, Sonny accused Consuelo of taking multiple lovers, Lord Castlereagh among them, and a butler confirmed secret visits. Her old affair with Winthrop Rutherford was notorious, and Gladys later hinted that Ivor, Consuelo's son, was not the Duke's. Winston Churchill tried to salvage the marriage, but Sonny refused. In 1907, they formally separated. The monarchy banned them from appearing together at royal events, and even Theodore Roosevelt called Sonny a cad. After a brief, fruitless link with Goffredo Caetani, Gladys drifted close to Lord Brooke, son of the Earl and Countess of Warwick. They were engaged briefly, but King Edward VII likely quashed it. Brooke's mother was the king's mistress. Mary Berenson always said Gladys was too entangled with Sonny to marry elsewhere. Even after a fiery 5-month romance with Count Hermann von Kaiserling, who proposed, Gladys turned him away. In 1909, Gladys turned up at a Tati unexpectedly. Once so polished, she was now coarse, hoarse, and fixated on risque talk. Yet Mary admitted her energy could light up a room. At Villa Gambaraya, Gladys drifted barefoot like a sprite, bought a dog, mocked her guests at tea, and wore ragged clothes. She sneered at romance, hygiene, and polite society, claiming she loved no one and lived only for amusement. She spent 5 isolated months at Caprarola with just a cook and 2 dogs. By late 1909, she was back in Paris, unwell, increasingly cynical, yet still attending the Ballets Russes and Paris's cultural circles. Her mental health frayed. Haunted by Rome, she admitted to Mary she longed for death and thought of suicide daily. In June 1910, Gladys bristled when Dorothy announced her engagement to Prince Abba Radziwill, a man who had once pursued Gladys and disrupted another cousin's match. His mother Botched was appalled, even questioning Dorothy's paternity. Determined not to die unmarried, Dorothy married the prince quietly in London on July 5, 1910. Botched boycotted the ceremony. By early 1911, Dorothy faked a pregnancy to force the Radziwills to accept her. After Prince George's death in 1914, her husband inherited the title, making her Serene Highness, but constant feuds with Botched over money followed. Meanwhile, Florence plotted to marry Edith to a European noble. Edith resisted, fell for banker George Lee Peabody, who died from a brain tumor days before their wedding. Though devastated, Edith inherited a large settlement. Florence's reaction was cold. She mourned the lost dowry, not the man. Edith later married Henry G. Grey in 1916 and received part of Moraine Baldwin's estate in 1924. By 1911, the American press crowned Gladys the most tragic of the three American graces. While her sisters secured titled or wealthy husbands, Gladys, tethered to Sonny, who remained married to Consuelo, remained alone. Cut off from American high society, stranded in Paris, she told reporters her beauty had been only a curse, leaving her branded the most miserable girl in Paris. Despite growing closer to Sonny, she remained only his mistress. Consuelo still held the title. When Florence, deep in debt, begged family for help, Gladys snapped, "That does not concern me." An encounter with Princess Marta Bibesco turned vicious. Bibesco mocked Gladys's wax-damaged face, calling her a gorgon. The failed injections had left blotches and sagging skin. Gladys tried reshaping her face by massaging it by fireplaces, but refused to vanish. She sat for artists, clinging to the last scraps of her social place until exhaustion drove her into seclusion. Gladys and Sonny escaped for 2 weeks at Mont d'Or Spa, then parted, he back to Blenheim, she to Caparola. Without her, he spiraled into depression. Historian A.L. Rouse later noted the Spencer Churchill's inherited gloom. As he struggled to maintain his grand estate and seethed over Consuelo's public charity, Sonny clung to any scandal that might distract the world. Their letters revealed a conspiratorial bond. Gladys called herself his natural tonic, and they mocked public figures with secret nicknames: Squiff for Asquith, King Log for George V, and Old Tart for Consuelo. And he quietly arranged legal protections for Gladys in case of his death. By 1913, cracks began to show. Sonny refused an invitation to Caparola because Florence would be there. When he vacationed alone on the Riviera and chose tennis over returning to Gladys, her furious letter shattered their fragile understanding. When war broke out in 1914, Gladys's world came undone. Vacationing with Florence and Prince Doria in St. Moritz scandalized what friends she had left. She rushed to Paris to help with war relief, but terrified of an invasion, fled to London on September 3rd, clutching nearly £4,000 in cash. In London, Gladys raged at Britain's complacency, convinced the war would be long and ruinous. While Sonny returned to military duty, she threw herself into relief work, raising funds for wounded men and horses, distributing supplies, and writing bleak, prophetic letters. Her once glittering world shrank to the grim demands of war. Prince Doria died in December 1914, leaving Florence devastated and broke. His son inherited everything and didn't even arrange the funeral. Florence kept Caparola, but sank further when Italy joined the war in 1915. She wrote Gladys convinced they'd never see each other again. Still, Florence stayed active, opening a workroom that produced thousands of gas masks and garments by September, paying local women fairly. Admirers called her half hurricane, half cautionary tale. Her brilliance left ruin behind. She even claimed Gladys turned a £400 loan into £16,000 and aided Belgian troops. Gladys stayed mostly in Paris, managing dwindling funds, hosting modest lunches with old friends like Marius Miguel, and watching her dazzling life vanish. She noted bitterly that Dorothy had lost the Radziwill estates to the Germans. In October 1915, after battling bronchitis, she went to Lausanne for treatment, joking darkly that a bomb might make recovery pointless. From Paris, she wrote raw accounts of Verdun's horror. Meanwhile, the Duke broke his foot riding at Blenheim and, terrified of maiming, fretted that Gladys, who once spurned a suitor for losing a foot, would leave him too. But Gladys was unraveling herself. Spiritually emptied, she confided she felt hollow, torn between retreating to a convent or ending her life outright. The Duke visited her in Paris, but returned to London distraught. In his aching letters, he confessed life without her was unthinkable. With Europe in ruins, he pushed to divorce Consuelo and finally marry Gladys, now deep into her 30s. But royal resistance and wartime legal snarls blocked every attempt. Even a final push in March 1918 failed, leaving Gladys stranded, older, exhausted, and still unmarried. By 1917, Gladys's health crumbled again. When the Duke learned she was alone in London without a nurse, he sent only a letter, not himself, a slight that stung. She fled to Brighton, but he misread her absence as mourning the late Duke of Norfolk. Misunderstandings festered. That September, Gladys returned to Paris. The Duke, isolated and brooding, dreamed of retreating to a monastery, suspicious even of Churchill's influence over her. On March 23, 1918, German artillery struck Paris. Taxis refused to approach her Quai Voltaire flat. After visiting Comtesse Edith de Beaumont, Gladys was walking home when a shell landed 30 yards away. Thrown to the pavement, she escaped with only a bruised arm. "Thanks," she said, to her fur shawl, while 4 people died. The Duke, frantic, begged her to flee, especially when she began touring bombed ruins, oddly fascinated by the destruction. Since 1914, Florence had thrown herself into the Farnese Relief Fund at Caprarola, leading 65 women who sewed thousands of garments for the war. By early 1918, she crossed the Atlantic to raise funds, briefly revived, then crushed by Italian bureaucracy and her daughter's coldness. Dorothy's letter was curt. Gladys hadn't written it all. Florence confessed she felt abandoned by the very family she'd sacrificed everything for. That July, while Gladys was in the Loire Valley, urgent telegrams came. Her mother was dying. She rushed to Caprarola, but it was too late. On July 15, 1918, Florence died at 59. Rumors whispered of starvation, poisoning, or a fall, but nothing was proven. Mourners recoiled when a cloud of flies rose from the body. Prince Maffeo Sierra secured the estate until Gladys arrived. She buried Florence in Rome's Protestant cemetery near Keats and Shelley, with Uncle Harleston beside her, then quietly sold furniture to cover debts. Despite it all, Florence was posthumously awarded the Italian Red Cross Medal. Marcel Proust wrote Gladys praising her mother's spirit. Though their bond had frayed, Gladys never truly recovered, telling Churchill later that Florence was her first heart bond, the only witness to her entire life. Losing her wasn't just loss of family, but loss of self. The armistice brought no joy for Gladys. As Europe cheered, she withdrew to the south of France, hollowed by grief, slipping into shadows. In spring 1919, she returned to Paris to settle Florence's affairs and grew skeptical of Wilson's League of Nations. That year, she had a final, explosive falling out with Bernard Berenson, leaping from a carriage in morning black, nearly poking his eye out, accusing him of betrayal. Berenson cut her off for good, calling her manipulative and unstable. Now in Nice, Gladys tended her garden and watched Dorothy spiral deeper into scandal. After Prince Abba Radziwill lost his estates, Dorothy plotted fresh infamy, trying to become the second of Count Palfy's 8 wives and famously driving a leopard through a Roman ballroom. Still bitter about their mother's favoritism, Gladys mocked Dorothy's reckless stunts. Gossip claimed Dorothy aided Germans in Switzerland and was barred from Italy. She had a daughter, Betka, in 1917, and by 1919 was already seeking annulment. In January 1920, Gladys's name was dragged into Dorothy's mess. The Daily Graphic falsely claimed she'd had an affair with the German crown prince and been exiled. Furious, Gladys hired the Duke's lawyers, sued for libel, won £500 plus costs, and cleared her name. Meanwhile, Consuelo finally agreed to divorce Marlborough to marry Jacques Balsan. To satisfy outdated laws, the Marlboroughs staged a final cohabitation at Crowhurst under Lady Lillian Grenfell's watch. On December 15, 1919, the Duke ended the charade with a curt goodbye. On February 28, 1920, to meet residency rules, he booked into Claridge's with an unnamed woman, signing as Spencer. The divorce was filed November 10, 1920. Marlborough called it the last blow that woman could strike. Finally free, he urged Gladys to cultivate ties with his wealthy cousin, Eugene Higgins. She kept the family lawyer Léon Renaud loyal and charmed Paris gossip circles, though Marlborough worried how courts would view a second marriage. Plans tangled quickly. Marlborough wanted a simple civil ceremony. Gladys demanded a religious one too. Dr. Chauncey Goodrich of the American Church refused on moral grounds. An English clergyman declined for legal reasons. Bombarded by press and odd gifts, fans, Persian embroidery from a sultan's daughter, Gladys complained to the Daily Express she'd endured 2 miserable weeks and still didn't know who would marry them. On June 23, 1921, they wed civilly at the British consulate. Marlborough, cheerful in gray morning suit, handed out cigarettes to reporters. Gladys arrived in navy silk with matching hat, escorted by the chic Comtesse de Bois-Rouvray. She cheekily shaved 5 years off her age on the certificate. After, she smoked gold-tipped cigarettes with Bois-Rouvray before Marlborough whisked her off to lunch and the Auteuil racetrack. The next day, amid heat and Paris strikes, Reverend T.H. Wright, a reluctant Scottish Presbyterian, married them again in Higgins's art-filled drawing room at 7 Place d'Iéna, notorious for risque paintings. Guests fled to the garden for air. Dorothy came. Edith and the Churchills did not. At 4 p.m., the newlyweds slipped away to honeymoon in the south of France. Gladys, draped in pearl gray crêpe de chine and a sweeping cape, symbolically shed her bohemian past. On July 28, 1921, they returned to Blenheim, signing the guest book together for the first time. Now Duchess, Gladys told Jacob Epstein, "I married a house, not a man." Blenheim, Queen Anne's prize for the first Duke's victory, was built to rival Versailles. The Vanderbilt fortune had restored it. Duchesne's Italian garden was finished in 1922, but grandeur came with headaches. Food arrived cold after its 75-yard trek from kitchen to table. Gladys scoffed to McCall's, "There isn't one decent bathroom in the whole bloody place." There was no telephone until 1925. Some claim the Duke simply refused to use one. 80 servants ran the estate, half inside, half out. Footmen over 6 feet wore maroon coats and violet flower wigs. 10 men tended 40 horses. Others manned the fire brigade and guarded game preserves. The Duke's temper was sharp. When a groundskeeper called in sick, he sneered, "The lower orders are never ill." Gladys's bond with her stepsons soured fast. At dinner, she once noted that Mary, Lord Blandford's wife, wore a necklace identical to one in her vault. Blandford called her a liar. She saw how desperately her husband craved their approval. Only Ivor, who shared her passion for French art, showed warmth. Her ties to the Churchills fared no better. She'd once known Jenny Cornwallis West, the Duke's aunt, who died soon after the wedding, likely never seeing Grace Curzon's letter calling Gladys a masquerader. Winston hovered, offering help, then vanishing. Clementine struck her as cold. No opinions, only convictions. Only Lady Albertha, her mother-in-law, and Lady Sarah Wilson, the famed Boer War correspondent, remained loyal. Still, Oxfordshire shunned her. She tried to belong, picking potatoes, attending village fairs, but locals stayed loyal to Consuelo. Colonel John Eastwood even lied about being in London to dodge her table. The Duke found him hiding in his garden that same day. Marlborough pushed for Gladys's royal presentation, but the Duchess of Devonshire refused to sponsor her. Lady Birkenhead stepped in instead. On June 13, 1923, Gladys curtsied before the King and Queen at Buckingham Palace in silver and antique Venetian lace, only to be humiliated when Queen Mary barred her from the garden party, refusing to acknowledge the divorced Duke's new wife. In December 1921, Blandford's wife gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. Just weeks later, Gladys discovered she was pregnant, a shock she didn't welcome. Sick and unwilling, she sensed her husband didn't want the child either. On January 15th, she miscarried and felt quiet relief. She'd never wanted motherhood or life trapped at Blenheim. Alone and weak, she clung to her nurse for comfort, while the Duke lingered in London, sending only bland words, even on her birthday. By summer, her mood lifted slightly, lunching with Professor Lindemann, handing out fete prizes, attending dances. For their first anniversary, they held a church service and a dreary picnic at Black Bourton, spoiled by the Duke's brooding obsession with Napoleon, whose biographies he devoured at every meal. By late July, Gladys pined for France, fearing marriage to an Englishman had cut her off from her real home. She reached Paris on August 8th, visiting her beloved but failing nurse, Irma Deodat, dining with Walter Berry and Abbé Mounier. In Clarence, she sought Rousseau's wild landscapes but found them dull. Interlaken revived her. Thundering waterfalls and glaciers rekindled her wonder. At the Jungfrau, she braved an icy climb roped to a guide, 500 feet in 18 minutes, while the Duke, suspicious of their friendly driver, refused to join. Byrne bored them both. Drab hotel, stale views, even the bears seemed disinterested. Back in Paris, Gladys slipped into her old rhythms: hair appointments, the Ritz, dinners with Barry, viewing Rembrandts at Duvayne's. She caught the grip, delaying her return to England. Once recovered, she lingered among literary friends who, like her, felt adrift and disappointed. When she finally returned to London on September 25th, she felt hollow, longing for France, yet unmoved by leaving it. Arriving at Charing Cross, she found no one waiting. Her footman showed up, but no carriage. She ate a cold dinner alone, watching another couple's joyful reunion, a sharp contrast to her bleak homecoming. After France, her gloom deepened. She loathed London and Blenheim, but stayed sick with a cold until the Duke finally fetched her. Briefly cheered by frost and her roses, she quickly sank again, pruning them for hours alone to escape Blenheim's suffocating grandeur. At the state opening of Parliament on November 23rd, she felt the cold eyes of other duchesses. Christmas was bleak, the Duke irritable, Gladys weeping alone at dawn. Her only gifts were a foot muff from him and a work bag from Lady Sarah Wilson. On December 27th, watching rain sweep Blenheim, she mourned her crumbling marriage. 1923 began with Gladys tending the gardens, planting roses. At nearly 42, she felt old to her bones. She endured another state opening that February, and in April, shivered through the Duke of York's wedding to Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. Hosting the Spanish royals proved exhausting. Infanta Beatrix and Don Alfonso insisted on leaving at 6 a.m., dragging the entire household into full dress before dawn. In July 1925, she invited sculptor Jacob Epstein to Blenheim to make a bust of the Duke, drawn to Epstein's bold honesty. Tensions flared immediately. Epstein and Gladys wanted a modern pose. The Duke demanded romance and grandeur. Marlborough, embarrassed by Epstein's bohemian life, distanced himself, saying Epstein was Gladys's guest alone. For 10 days, the Duke sat for 5 hours daily, aging visibly under the strain. Clashes over the pedestal meant only the head and neck were finished. Epstein also sculpted Gladys, capturing the harsh truth of her damaged face. She respected his brutal honesty, but never kept the peace. Work resumed in London in January 1926, adding the Duke's garter robes and, at Gladys's insistence, his hands. When unveiled at Blenheim, the bust split opinion. Some saw nobility, others called it pompous. Marlborough joked it made him look like he'd won the Battle of Blenheim single-handedly, but quietly came to resent it. Epstein left underpaid and disappointed, though he'd immortalized them both. On October 16, 1923, Gladys suffered another miscarriage after a quarrel with Marlborough led to a fall. She recovered at the Prince's Hotel in Brighton, its renovations hammering on, while the Duke showed no real concern. In January 1924, she had an appendectomy, then convalesced for 3 weeks at Brighton's Metropole Hotel, dingy and teeming with illicit couples. A curt letter from the Duke, giving vague travel plans, deepened her sense of abandonment. On August 4th, Moraine Baldwin died, leaving Gladys $45,716, less than the $50,000 she'd expected. She blamed Edith and her husband for draining the estate and vented to Uncle Charlie. By December, Gladys was pregnant again. After days of agony, she miscarried at 3 a.m. on January 5th, 1925. She woke hours later with chloroform burns scarring both eyes, her left permanently damaged. Her doctor warned another pregnancy could kill her. Privately, Gladys never wanted children. The deepest split in the marriage came from Marlborough's drift into Roman Catholicism. Once a proud pagan, he now craved absolutes. Churchill called it his hunger for the sublime. In 1922, the Bishop of Oxford barred him from a church conference, refusing to recognize his remarriage. Gladys raged, mocking the bishop as a disgusting old bish, and blamed Lord Saye and Selle for meddling. She and Ethel Boileau co-wrote a scathing letter warning the church it would lose believers trapped by modern realities like annulment. The uproar only pulled Marlborough deeper in. He began Jesuit instruction with Father Martindale, funded Catholic causes, and craved spiritual cleansing, signs his cousin Sir Shane Leslie called spiritual loneliness. Gladys, despite her Catholic upbringing, stayed evasive about faith, frustrating Martindale's attempts to pull her closer. Their spiritual differences deepened the rift in an already crumbling marriage. In 1926, Consuelo Balsan quietly secured a Vatican annulment of her marriage to Marlborough, claiming coercion, a bombshell when the New York Times exposed it. Rumors flew, bribes, forged letters, and questions about their son's legitimacy. Marlborough's only role was paying her travel costs. Consuelo's mother brushed it off as a modern formality. With the annulment sealed, Marlborough plunged fully into Catholicism. On February 1, 1927, they renewed their vows at Westminster. Cardinal Bourne blessed Gladys's ring as Marlborough gave Father Martindale his prized Cellini crucifix. But faith didn't heal the rift. Gladys distrusted the church's hierarchy, storming out of Blenheim when Ronald Knox visited, mocking British Catholics as a shadowy political club. The church's bans on contraception only deepened her dread of pregnancy and sense of isolation. By the decade's end, Marlborough grew bitter. Twice married, twice let down, he brooded that Americans no longer revered European aristocracy. He sold personal papers to American collectors, muttering the Gilded Age was dead. Yet Gladys left her peculiar stamp on Blenheim. In August 1928, she commissioned Colin Gill to paint 6 impressions of her eyes, 3 blue, 3 brown, on the portico ceiling. She inspired 2 stone sphinxes by W. Ward Willis for the water terraces in 1930. Each wore her face. Forced to abandon her beloved rock garden, Gladys threw herself into breeding King Charles spaniels, funded by Uncle Charlie and supported by loyal friend Agnes Grills. She obsessed over pedigrees, cut deals, and became patron of the King Charles Spaniel Club in 1932. Soon, the dogs overran Blenheim, turning the great hall into a sprawling kennel with a smell guests found unbearable. The Duke raged that the dogs ruined carpets and stole his wife's affection. In 1931, amid her growing isolation, Gladys made one last tender trip to Paris to nurse her childhood nanny, Irma Deodat. She stayed at Irma's side for 10 days until her death, then never set foot on the continent again. That same summer, new grief struck when her beloved spaniel Snowflake died giving birth. Guilt-ridden for breeding Snowflake too young, she begged Marlborough to have her taxidermied, only to find the lifeless result deepened her sorrow. In November, she hosted a lavish, coming-of-age bonfire and dance for Sonny's 60th birthday. But beneath the spectacle, their marriage was crumbling. Their tension soon exploded into scandalous scenes. At dinner, Gladys bragged she'd slept with every prime minister in Europe and most kings, mocked the Duke's politics, argued with footmen about communism, and once set a revolver on the table, threatening to shoot him. By 1931, Marlborough retreated from Blenheim altogether, preferring hotels and racing stables, pouring his fortune into horses instead of his wife. Gladys accused him of cowardice, hired detectives to expose his affairs, with Mrs. Redmond McGrath and actress Bunny Doble among them. By early 1932, the marriage was shattered. Marlborough stayed away, returning only for his mother's funeral. One dinner ended with him saying coldly, "I have no consideration for you and never have had." The 1929 crash had wiped out Gladys's Deacon trust, once $30,000 a year. Dependent on her tight-fisted husband, she now wore patched dresses pinned together. By late 1932, Marlborough looked increasingly harried as Gladys threatened divorce. His son Ivor noted the Duke exaggerated debts, like an £8,000 super tax, to appear broke in court. Ivor refused to help, saying the couple had long lived in a world of self-made illusions. Siegfried Sassoon offered sympathy, but Father Martindale, once her spiritual ally, refused to intervene, fearing the scandal more than their misery. On New Year's Day 1933, Marlborough's final gesture was a cold pat on her shoulder before leaving for London, taking most of the household staff. It was the final break in a 35-year saga. Alone at Blenheim, except for hostile servants, Gladys now faced legal siege. In January, Marlborough refused her a new car and ignored her pleas to dismiss staff she despised. By April, he formally accused her of disturbing his peace and mismanaging Blenheim, offering either a small house with kennels and £2,500 a year or £3,000 to disappear elsewhere. Her lawyers demanded full disclosure of his wealth. To strengthen his case, Marlborough's side painted her as unstable, claiming she'd once chased him with a revolver. Gladys told Anita Leslie it was just to scare him away from her bedroom. Her lawyers proved it was only a toy flashlight. Doctors weighed in. Sir Farquhar Buzzard blamed her eccentricities for the Duke's ruin. Dr. Raby described her profound melancholy, now turned against her. The Duke's smear widened, accusing her of drug use, obsessive dog breeding, stalking the grounds with a gun. Caretaker Edith Hollis testified about shredded upholstery, fleeing maids, and Gladys pointing a revolver from a car window, joking she'd shoot bandits. Rumors claimed she foamed at the mouth and haunted the long library at night. In March 1933, Gladys appealed to stepson Ivor for help. Sympathetic but neutral, he refused to intervene. By April, she vowed never to return, demanding a £10,000 annuity and a furnished house. Marlborough refused. Her lawyers warned, push for divorce and risk ending up with nothing. By May, Gladys had just £9 left. Marlborough blocked her from hosting a weekend gathering, shuttered Blenheim, and fired the last staff. Barred from Carlton House Terrace, she stayed in a London hotel, managing her own exit. On May 26th, she returned for 2 nights under legal guard, gathered her things and her beloved spaniels, and posed on the steps. Goodbye to all that. She retreated first to Seaford House with Princess Lyda Thurn and taxis, then to a single room at the Carlton Hotel. On June 1st, Marlborough stopped paying household costs, replacing them with a grudging £250 monthly allowance. Friends like Lily de Clermont-Tonnerre called his cruelty shameful. To defy rumors of madness, Gladys reappeared in public, discussing Proust with Harold Nicholson, watching Wimbledon, and attending Chips Channon's wedding alone. Meanwhile, Marlborough reclaimed Blenheim's dog-filled halls, telling family he was relieved. Churchill Circle whispered Gladys was deranged, destined for an asylum. Some, like Dorothy Hilton Green, defended her brilliance, but the tale of the brilliant Duchess undone by her own mind stuck fast. After the Duke retreated, Gladys barricaded herself inside 7 Carlton House Terrace to protect her remaining belongings. For 10 tense days from July 27th, loyal friends like Diana Mitford and Patrick Balfour came by, while her doctor made rounds and crates of eggs and newspapers kept her going. On August 5th, her butler warned that the head housemaid had secretly let in 3 men sent by Marlborough. They smoked inside, cut the power, spoiled her food, and locked the larder. When one refused to stop smoking, Gladys slapped the pipe from his mouth and called the police, mocking Marlborough's cheap tricks in a letter to Phyllis de Janzé. The siege escalated, utilities cut, basement sealed to trap her upstairs. She survived on canned food and candle-boiled tea, shivering through cold baths. On August 8th, moving vans came as lawyers and reporters watched. That night, Gladys and her friends abandoned the house and returned to the Carlton. 2 days later, Marlborough rewrote his will to cut her out entirely. Legal battles dragged on. He barred her from removing anything else from Blenheim, forcing her to file an itemized claim, including the taxidermied snowflake, still contested for years. Since May 1933, Gladys had hired famed detective Maud West to shadow Marlborough, sometimes joining the stakeouts herself. She caught him with Frances Doble, Phyllis de Janzé, Mrs. McGrath, and even produced a taxi driver who swore the Duke had sex with a 19-year-old dance teacher in his cab after leaving Café de Paris. By November, Sir Patrick Hastings ruled the story credible. Though never filed, Gladys's draft divorce petition was brutal, citing cruelty, a black eye in 1927 confirmed by Lady Ravensdale, a kick to the ribs, and the Duke's Christmas 1932 suggestion that she run off with another man. She used the siege at Carlton House Terrace as proof she was endangered, with sworn affidavits to back her up. She likened Marlborough to Brodie in Hatter's Castle, a tyrant consumed by black, vicious personal pride. Through 1934, the battle dragged on. Gladys felt betrayed after decades of loyalty. Despite legal fees, she clung to appearances, rotating between the Carlton Hotel and friends' houses, visiting York, scribbling Baudelaire's line, "Always be drunk," on wine, virtue, or poetry in Eve Fairfax's book. She put on a brave face, greeting Churchill politely before Marlborough at the state opening of Parliament, but her finances collapsed. Cartier sued her in March 1934 over unpaid debts. When Hui magazine printed a vulgar cartoon about a duchess, unrelated to her, Gladys sued anyway, dragging the fight into 1935. By May worn down, she gave in to a rest cure. As divorce talks froze, word came that Marlborough was terminally ill. On May 25th, Blenheim's electrician warned Gladys the Duke might not survive. doctors in France found incurable cancer near his liver. He returned to England to die, crossing the Channel with Ian Malcolm, who noted the eerie cross of fate on his brow. Despite everything, Marlborough downplayed it, refusing morphia, claiming pain purified the soul, avoiding hot baths for fear of heart failure, yet still drinking and dancing. Neighbor Ursula Cottrell Dormer was shocked by how frail he seemed. In London, he hosted a final dinner at Carlton House Terrace. A kind maid secretly updated Gladys on his decline. In his final days, he rambled on a sofa as his sister, Lady Lillian Grenfell, kept vigil. His son Ivor said he felt no pain. Father Martindale gave him communion and found him moved, but dazed. On June 30th, 1934, the 9th Duke of Marlborough died at 62. After the Duke's death, Gladys, now his widow, retreated quietly to the countryside. Friends like Nancy and Diana Mitford noted her grief. She replied graciously to condolence letters, even from those who didn't know she'd long been estranged. Lady Edward Spencer Churchill saw through her stoic mask and knew she was deeply shaken. Meanwhile, Consuelo returned to Blenheim on August 4th, pleased to see the restorations her Vanderbilt fortune had paid for, slipping easily back as matriarch. Gladys refused the title Duchess, calling herself Mrs. Spencer, or simply Widow Marlborough, saying she'd spent long enough trying to escape that name. Reporters traced her to Town Farm in Mixbury under Mrs. Grills's care. She was often spotted shopping in a smock, rumored to keep 100 spaniels. When she dumped water on a journalist's head, talk of her madness grew, feeding her legend as a reclusive eccentric. In Paris, Abbé Mounier heard the Princess de Polignac declare Gladys insane. Bernard Berenson, once her confidant, now called her a mythic cat in human form, driven by raw instinct, blaming her ferocity for her lonely ruin. Determined to sever ties with the Marlborough name, she bristled when the new Duchess rerouted her mail and blamed Blandford and Ivor for their shallow entitlement. A visit to Eaton Hall confirmed society had turned its back. Only Lady Serena James remained kind, inviting her for Christmas 1934. In January 1935, Gladys made one last public stand, suing a magazine for implying she'd had an affair with a clergyman. Clad in severe black, she insisted it was to defend the Marlborough name, not for money. Lord Hewart awarded her £150 and an apology, but questioned why she'd fought the case at all. After that, Gladys slipped fully from public life, seen only at Simpson's or the Ritz in London, or local shows in the countryside. She even prosecuted a man for stealing her photo. Meanwhile, the Blenheim Estate Company dissolved under debt, part of the late Duke's tangled legacy. In 1938, as her Mixbury lease ended, she bought Grange Farm in Chacombe for £1,400. The stone cottage, with orchard and books, became her final refuge, despite summer water shortages and the drone of the nearby factory. Villagers found her odd but mesmerizing. One even made coffins for her dead spaniels. By the age of 58, Gladys's eccentricity was infamous. She wore battered boots, painted her legs to keep flies off, refused milk, and kept aggressive geese. Locals nicknamed her Old Dutch or the Witch for her night wanderings and strange garb. When war came, she ignored blackout orders, openly admired Hitler's magnetism, and sneered at Churchill as showy. She read obsessively Consuelo's memoirs, Berenson's books, French classics, and spun grand tales about the late Duke. Her bond with Agnes Grills frayed by 1941, but they stayed tied until Grills's death. She took in May Hobbs, a London evacuee, as helper. Demanding yet fascinating, she made Hobbs pay for eggs, claimed she wrote under a pen name, and boasted she'd stitched her own face. Books sat warming on electric stoves. Meals were left in the outhouse for pickup after dark. When Hobbs finally left, Gladys sighed, "Everyone I love lets me down." By 1941, rumors claimed the Deacon sisters no longer spoke, yet they still exchanged letters. Dorothy, stuck in Nazi Vienna, openly backed the regime. Edith in America sometimes sent food parcels. Edith's daughters remembered her saying Dorothy would trade any secret for a good bar of soap. Early in the war, Gladys wrote to Dorothy complaining about a broken arm from farm work, her hatred of rural life, and even mocked America's gas mask drills. By 1944, hardship closed in. German bombers shook her nights, a fox killed her chickens, and severe burns on her feet left her bedridden for 11 weeks with no money to replace ruined sheets. In 1945, German prisoners of war pruned her apple trees. Gladys found them polite and kept in touch with some. She mourned lost friends such as Lady Lansdowne's sons, Tom Mitford, Elizabeth Babesco, and filled her diaries with biting lines about Churchill, Mussolini's execution, and Hitler's death. Withdrawn at Chacombe, she endured village boys mocking her as a witch, once responding by waving an unloaded shotgun. Unkempt, missing teeth, hair wild, she claimed her isolation came not from her ruined face, but from deeper wounds left by her marriage. She mourned her friend Ethel Boileau, who always said Gladys had taught her how to survive. Grills visited again in 1947, but by 1948 they were parted for good. In 1952, Grills was found dead in the Thames. Her death remains unresolved. Gladys's sisters drifted even further away. Edith's husband admitted they hadn't heard from her in years. Dorothy, still obsessed with her own status, was shocked that Gladys continued to fight her over an old lacquer table, proof that even alone, Gladys clung fiercely to the scraps of her world. In 1951, Gladys flagged down Andrzej Kwiatkowski, a young Polish displaced person, to fix her gate, then hired him as her loyal weekend handyman. For 2 years she refused to let him inside, forcing him to pass tools through windows while she barked orders from behind locked doors. She kept a Proustian schedule, sleeping by day, rising at dusk, and secretly marked his car tires to test his honesty. When she finally allowed Andrzej inside, he found the drawing room tidy and full of art and cats, Gladys puffing on her pipe. But the rest of the house was chaos. A refrigerator storing cat corpses, newspapers stacked waist-high, a bed crammed with books, no plumbing, meals cooked in a cauldron, a revolver always near. Heavy, greasy curtains shut out daylight, doors were bolted, an axe waited by the door, and chicken and pig wire ringed the garden. To villagers, she was a ghost story, spotted in battered boots and a sou'wester hat, roaming with a flashlight. Children raced past her garden, whispering the witch might poison them. Meanwhile, Consuelo Balsan erased Gladys from her memoirs, dismissing her as just a young American girl and warning publishers she was rather mad. Near 80, Gladys's health failed. She broke her shoulder but let it mend untreated, refused hospital care, and clung fiercely to her fortress. Andrzej carried her upstairs daily with the same rope and pulley once used for tools. Frail but stubborn, she clipped newspapers, called police about imagined trespassers, and sank deeper into paranoia. By 1962, complaints mounted. Count John Palffy, handling her finances, called her house a fire trap, filth, barricades, isolation, and ordered her forced removal. On the 15th of March, cars arrived at Chacombe. Cornered, Andrzej unlocked the door. 4 men in white coats dragged Gladys out half-dressed and freezing, wrenched from her fortress at last. Dragged from Chacombe, Gladys arrived at St. Andrews in a Rolls-Royce, standard for the elite asylum that once housed Violet Gibson and Lucia Joyce. Legally, she reclaimed her title Duchess of Marlborough after Mary's death in 1961. Staff were shocked by her filthy state, but she immediately demanded daily baths. A severe respiratory infection nearly killed her, but when she begged to go home, doctors refused, declaring her unstable. Defiant and suspicious, she refused to sign papers and trusted only Andrzej, though she never forgave him for unlocking the door. By then, Dorothy was dead, leaving Edith, estranged for decades, as her only kin. Edith's daughter Milo Grey showed mild interest. Betka was kept in the dark. Count Palfy managed her affairs abroad through Dick Jocelyn, while banker Terence Woodford Smith tried to reassure her she wasn't entirely alone. Dr. O'Connell labeled her condition persecution mania, though her letters proved her mind was sharper than they claimed. Almost at once, her family circled her estate, plotting to secure her art, books, furniture. They pressured her to sign power of attorney to Jocelyn. She refused, fueling claims she was unsound. When Jocelyn visited in April 1962, she called him a liar and a thief. Meanwhile, he cleared Chacombe, barricades, trash, sick geese, debating whether to kill her cats. Hidden treasures surfaced, rare books, jewelry, diaries her nephew wanted destroyed. Despite costs mounting, they aimed to settle her affairs cheaply, though she still had her trust income, Chacombe, and the Marlborough name. When she refused to sign, they petitioned for court receivership. Edith agreed from America, but Gladys wrote the Court of Protection, swearing she was sane. The court sided with her. Control went instead to the official solicitor, shutting her family out. Gladys clung to that victory and petitioned the Mental Health Review Tribunal for release. But her family fought back. Palfy argued Chacombe was unfit. Dr. O'Connell testified she must stay locked away. The tribunal upheld her detention but hid the verdict for weeks. Gladys already knew. Her diaries show she understood she would die confined, her treasures controlled by people she no longer trusted. Yet, even locked away, Gladys staged one last defiance, uncovering her nephew's plot to smuggle her art to Switzerland. With Andre's help, she unearthed the forged letter and produced it dramatically from her nightgown before the Lord Chancellor, forcing the official solicitor to keep permanent control, shutting out her family for good. Unbeknownst to her, Chacombe was sold in 1965 to fund her care. Her paintings were sealed in a vault, her cats put down, her things packed into storage, yet Gladys spent her final years in a bare hospital room with only an iron bed, her wealth locked far out of reach. At St. Andrew's, she clashed with nurses, scolding them for theft and ignorance, calling one the arch yapper. Aloof from other patients, whom she called the mads, she found comfort only in solitude. Yet her mind stayed keen. She scoffed at Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, telegrammed about Pope Paul VI's election, and tracked royal gossip and horse races. During Princess Alexandra's 1963 wedding, Gladys, who had once attended the Duke of York's nuptials in 1923, mocked the modern royal fanfare and the guests' sour expressions. Through it all, Andre remained her link to the free world, visiting with flowers and parcels from Chacombe. She scolded him often but cherished his loyalty. He was her last true tie to the life she'd so fiercely defended. By 1965, she seemed resigned. Medical notes from 1968 said she remained physically resilient, mentally alert, devouring newspapers daily. As she aged, Gladys was moved to the psycho-geriatric ward. She mostly stayed in her room, but defied frailty. When she broke her hip in January 1971 and turned 90 in Northampton General, she shocked staff by recovering and pacing the corridors with a Zimmer frame. In her final years at St. Andrew's, by then in O'Connell Ward, she relied on a wheelchair but could still stand when she pleased. Her fierce will and stubborn mind carried her through countless brushes with death certificates signed, last rites given. Yet Gladys always rallied back. Stripped of title and grandeur, she clung to pride. Even in her 90s, her mind stayed sharp and biting. Between 1975 and 1977, she still made tart remarks on Princess Margaret's divorce, Mao's death, and the Concorde's flights. Proof that Gladys's remarkable mind refused to fade. Though Gladys had long accepted her confinement at St. Andrew's, she never fully surrendered her dream of escape. After a bad fall in 1976 and a hospital transfer, She briefly believed she was finally free, only to be brought back, crushed by the truth. In her final years, her family reappeared. Dorothy's grandson, Georges Charles Tomaszewski, came first, then his mother Betka, who hadn't seen Gladys in decades. At first, Gladys refused to believe Betka was grown, insisting her niece was still a little girl, but at last she let her in. In the summer of 1977, she endured one final brush with death. Feverish, given last rites, yet true to form, she lingered. On October 13, 1977, at 96, Gladys Deacon died peacefully in her sleep. A quiet requiem was held at St. Gregory's in Northampton before she was laid to rest in Chacomb's churchyard. Loyal Andre, Betka, and a few villagers gathered as the reclusive Duchess finally came home. After her death, the long-prepared Christie's estate sale went ahead in 1978. In just an hour, her jewels alone brought nearly £500,000. The Marlborough diamond, a Rodin, and a forgotten Toulouse-Lautrec portrait found new owners, pushing total proceeds to £784,000. Over her grave at Chacombe, a simple stone was placed. It read, Gladys Marie Deacon, Dowager Duchess of Marlborough. 1881 to 1977, topped with a single eye, copied from Colin Gill's Blenheim mural, so that in death, as in life, her watchful gaze would linger, forever observing the world that once could not hold her. So, what did you think of the tragic life of Gladys Deacon? Had you heard of her before this video? What do you think of her stunning rise and fall? How she captivated high society and the Duke of Marlborough, only to live her final years as a recluse, abandoned by the same world and the same man who once claimed to love her? And what about her tragic decision to have paraffin wax injected into her beautiful face? Was her own vanity her undoing, or something darker? Another reminder of how relentlessly society demands women chase beauty at any cost, then punishes them when they do. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So drop a comment down below and let's keep the conversation going. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into history's most extraordinary figures. And a huge shout out to Jan Murray 3155, who correctly guessed the subject of today's video. Thank you for participating and for being such an active part of this community. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, keep seeking the stories that move your soul.